In the vast expanse of the galaxy where countless worlds spun in the darkness of space, the Galaxia Empire held dominion over hundreds of civilizations. Their military might was unquestioned, their control absolute. Among their most fearsome weapons were the apex predators' warriors, bred and trained from birth to be the ultimate instruments of death, devoid of emotion, mercy, or hesitation. Vash stood at the observation deck of the Imperial dreadnought Nemesis, watching the stars blur past as they traveled through hyperspace. His reflection in the reinforced, transparent aluminum showed a figure sculpted for war, tall, broad-shouldered, with cybernetic enhancements that gleamed dully beneath his dark tactical uniform. Scars crossed his face like a map of battles won, and his eyes cold, calculating empty, had seen the last breath leave countless enemies. Behind him, the command deck hummed with activity. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, their every action serving the Empire's will. Vash had been part of the machine for 28 years, since the day they'd taken him from the breeding facility on Nexus Prime. He'd never questioned his purpose, never felt doubt. He was what they'd made him: perfect, lethal, obedient. Predator Unit V-47, came the synthetic voice of Admiral Marcus Steele through the ship's communication system. Report to Briefing Bay 7. Priority 1. Vash turned from the viewport with mechanical precision, his enhanced muscles moving with deadly grace. Other crew members stepped aside as he passed, not out of respect, but from instinctive fear. They all knew what an apex predator could do, had heard the stories, had seen the aftermath. Briefing Bay 7 was a stark, clinical room, illuminated by harsh white light. Admiral Steele stood before a holographic display, his aged face bearing the scars of decades spent enforcing Imperial will. Beside him were two other officers: Colonel Thane, the logistics coordinator, and Dr. Sarah Reeves, head of the Psychological Warfare Division. Predator V-47. Admiral Steele began without preamble. You have a new assignment: Operation Severance. The hologram shifted, revealing the image of a woman. She appeared to be in her 30s, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to peer directly into Vash's soul. There was something unsettling about her gaze, a depth that spoke of hidden knowledge and unwavering determination. Target designation: Alira Thorne, continued the Admiral. Former Imperial scientist, current leader of the Liberated Worlds Coalition. Her rebellion has grown from a minor irritation to a significant threat to Imperial stability. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her voice clinical and detached. Our psychological profile indicates she possesses an abnormal ability to inspire others. Her followers believe she can unite the disparate rebel factions and overthrow Imperial rule. This cannot be allowed. The hologram expanded, showing footage of rebel attacks, propaganda broadcasts, and underground networks, all linked to Alira Thorne. Vash watched without expression, filing away tactical information, while his enhanced memory banks processed the data. She's currently on the outer rim world of Caldris, Admiral Steele explained. Intelligence suggests she's negotiating with the Zephyrian mining clans for resources and recruits. You will infiltrate the planet, locate the target, and terminate her with extreme prejudice. Vash nodded once, a sharp economical movement. Understood, Admiral. Timeline: you deploy within the hour. This mission is of the highest priority. The Emperor himself has taken an interest in its success. The briefing continued with technical details, extraction points, communication protocols, available resources. Vash absorbed it all, his mind automatically formulating infiltration strategies and contingency plans. When it concluded, he turned to leave, but Admiral Steele's voice stopped him. Predator V-47. Vash faced him again, expressionless. This target is different from your usual assignments. She has a way of getting into people's heads, making them question their loyalty. Do not underestimate her. I understand, sir. The mission will be completed. I know it will. Dismissed. As Vash strode through the corridors toward the hangar bay, he passed Talon, another apex predator, and his occasional partner on joint operations. Talon was newer to the program, only 12 years since his activation, but he had proven himself capable and ruthlessly efficient. "Another mission?" Talon asked, falling into step beside him. "Singular target, outer rim." "Lucky. I'm stuck with garrison duty on Mirian 4. Nothing but crop rotations and civilian protests." They reached the junction, where their paths diverged. Talon headed toward the training decks, while Vash continued to the hangar. As he walked, something nagged at the edge of his consciousness, a feeling he couldn't identify or categorize. For a moment, the image of Alira Thorne's eyes flashed through his mind, but he pushed it aside. Emotions were a weakness he'd been conditioned to suppress. The hangar bay buzzed with activity as technicians prepared his stealth cruiser, the Shadowbane. The vessel was a marvel of Imperial engineering, nearly invisible to most sensors, armed with the latest weapons and equipped with everything an apex predator might need for an assassination mission. As Vash performed his pre-flight checks, a junior technician approached nervously. "Sir, I've loaded your equipment cases and verified all systems. Everything's green." "Personal weapons." "All present and accounted for, sir." "Plasma rifle, molecular blade, neural disruptors, and the full array of toxins and poisons." Vash nodded, dismissing the technician with a gesture. As he settled into the pilot seat, his hands moved automatically over the controls, initiating launch sequence. The hangar's atmosphere recyclers hummed to life as the bay doors began to open, revealing the star-filled void beyond. The journey to Caldris took 3 standard days. During hyperspace transit, Vash maintained his conditioning regimen, physical training, weapons practice, mental exercises to keep his mind sharp and focused. He reviewed all available intelligence on Alira Thorne, her background as a former Imperial researcher, her escape during the Mendoran incident, her rise as a leader among the scattered rebel factions. On the final day of travel, as the Shadowbane dropped out of hyperspace near Caldris, Vash studied the planet's surface from orbit. It was a dusty, arid world rich in rare minerals, its surface scarred by massive mining operations. The indigenous Caldari had been relocated to reservation zones decades ago when the Empire claimed the planet's resources. Using the ship's advanced sensor array, Vash scanned for signs of rebel activity. He detected several camps in the northern hemisphere, hidden among the ruins of abandoned mining stations. Further analysis revealed energy signatures consistent with a rebel command post. He piloted the Shadowbane through the planet's upper atmosphere, using its stealth capabilities to avoid detection. The ship touched down silently in a rocky canyon, approximately 50 kilometers from the suspected rebel stronghold. Vash gathered his equipment, sealed the ship, and began his approach on foot. The desolate landscape of Caldris stretched endlessly in all directions. Red sand dunes punctuated by jagged rock formations and the skeletal remains of mining equipment. The air was thin and carried a metallic taste from the exposed mineral deposits. Vash's enhanced physiology adapted quickly to the conditions, his breathing and cellular metabolism adjusting automatically. As night fell, he activated his tactical camouflage and increased his pace. His enhanced vision allowed him to navigate the treacherous terrain in complete darkness, avoiding patrols and surveillance drones with practiced ease. Every step brought him closer to his target, closer to completing another mission for the Empire. But as he neared the rebel encampment, something unexpected happened. Whether it was equipment, malfunction, or simply bad luck, his camouflage flickered and failed just as he crested a ridge overlooking the camp. A sentry below spotted the movement and raised an alarm. Suddenly, the night erupted in chaos. Blaster fire streaked past him as rebels emerged from concealed positions. Vash moved with inhuman speed and precision, returning fire with his plasma rifle. Each shot found its mark, dropping enemies with ruthless efficiency. He advanced through their defenses like a force of nature, unstoppable and implacable. Within minutes, it was over. Bodies lay scattered around the perimeter, and the silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of overheated weapons and the groans of the wounded. Vash stood among the carnage, unmarked and unaffected by the violence he'd wrought. He was about to continue toward the main camp when a voice called out from behind him. "Quite impressive, Predator." Vash spun, weapon raised, but froze when he saw who had spoken. Alira Thorne stood 20 meters away, flanked by several rebels who kept their weapons lowered. She wore practical field clothing, reinforced fabric in muted colors designed for survival rather than appearance. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a functional braid, and those green eyes that had haunted the Empire's briefings now regarded him with an expression he found difficult to interpret. "How did you—" Vash began, then caught himself. He raised his plasma rifle, the targeting system automatically locked onto her center mass. "I've been expecting you," Alira said, taking a step forward. Her escort tensed, but she gestured for them to remain calm. "We monitored your ship's arrival 3 hours ago." The tactical situation ran through Vash's enhanced mind in microseconds. Multiple escape routes, potential cover positions, optimal firing angles. Yet something prevented him from pulling the trigger immediately. Standard protocol dictated immediate termination upon target identification. No conversation, no hesitation. "Stand down." Alira continued, her voice steady. "Let me show you something before you complete your mission." "I have no interest in rebel propaganda," Vash replied, though he didn't fire. "It's not propaganda. It's truth. The Empire has spent considerable effort hiding from people like you." Alira reached into her pocket, slowly producing a small data pad. She tossed it at Vash's feet. "That contains information about the Apex Predator program. Your program." Vash glanced down at the device, but kept his weapon trained on her. "Irrelevant. I know what I am and why I exist." "Do you really?" Alira's eyes never left his. "Do you know why they chose you specifically? Why they killed the other candidates? What they did to your brain to make you the perfect killer?" For the first time in years, Vash felt something resembling uncertainty. The conditioning that had shaped his entire existence screamed at him to fire, to complete the mission, and return to the ship. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for so long he'd forgotten it existed, wanted to hear what she had to say. "Pick up the pad," Alira said softly. "Read what they've hidden from you." Vash's finger tightened on the trigger. One shot. That's all it would take. The Empire would be pleased the rebellion would lose a key leader, and he would return home to await his next assignment. But he didn't fire. Instead, he knelt slowly, keeping his weapon pointed at Alira while his free hand retrieved the data pad. The moment his fingers touched the device, information flooded his enhanced consciousness. Medical records, training logs, psychological profiles, all bearing his designation, V-47. What he saw changed everything. Images of children, dozens of them all bearing his face at different ages. Records of surgical procedures, neural modifications, memory implants, and suppressions. He saw himself at age 5, screaming and struggling against restraints as technicians worked on his brain. He saw the other children, his siblings, his family being terminated one by one as they failed to meet the program's standards. "You were born Vaughn Cater on the agricultural world of Thessia," Alira said gently. "You had parents who loved you, brothers and sisters who played with you. The Empire took all of that away." The data pad trembled in Vash's hands as more memories surfaced, not his own, but belonging to the person he'd been before. Images of a warm kitchen filled with the smell of baking bread. A woman's voice singing lullabies. A man teaching him to fly a toy shuttle in a sun-dappled garden. "They stole your humanity to make you their weapon," Alira continued. "But it's still there, buried beneath all their conditioning. I can see it in your eyes right now." Vash looked up at her, and for the first time in 28 years, he felt tears forming. The plasma rifle wavered in his grip as conflicting impulses tore through his mind. Kill the target. Complete the mission. But beneath that, growing stronger by the moment, was something else, a desperate desire to understand what he'd lost. "This is what I fight for," Alira said, taking another step closer. Not just to overthrow the Empire, but to free the people they've enslaved, the children they've stolen, the lives they've destroyed. Every world under Imperial rule has stories like yours. The weapon in Vash's hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. He saw himself for what he truly was: not a weapon, not a predator, but a victim. The Empire hadn't just made him a killer. They'd murdered the child he'd once been. I was like you once, Alira said, now standing just meters away. A loyal Imperial believing in their cause. Until I saw what they really were. Until I learned the price of their order. Vash's vision blurred as more suppressed memories surfaced. The agony of the conditioning sessions. The faces of the technicians who had carved away his humanity piece by piece. The casual disposal of his fellow subjects when they'd outlived their usefulness. Why? He whispered the word torn from somewhere deep inside him. Why did they do this? Because it was easier than building a just society, Alira replied. Because ruling through fear required perfect monsters. Because they could. The plasma rifle fell from Vash's nerveless fingers, clattering against the rocky ground. He stared at his hands. Hands that had killed hundreds, perhaps thousands, in service of a lie. How many families had he destroyed? How many children had he orphaned? How many lives had he ended to preserve an empire built on suffering? I can't, he began, then stopped. The conditioning was still there, fighting against this new understanding, trying to reassert control. But the dam had been broken, and 28 years of suppressed humanity came flooding back. Alira reached out and gently touched his face, her fingers tracing one of his scars. You can choose differently now. You can help us build something better. Vash looked into her eyes and saw not an enemy to be eliminated, but a reflection of everything he'd been and everything he could become. The weight of his crimes pressed down on him, threatening to crush his newly awakened spirit. But alongside the guilt came something else: hope. Slowly, with great deliberation, Vash sank to his knees before her, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what he'd been, what he'd done, and what he chose to become. I was sent here to kill you, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I know, Alira replied, kneeling beside him. But you chose something else. The rebels around them lowered their weapons, sensing that a fundamental shift had occurred. In the distance, the lights of the Imperial fleet twinkled among the stars, waiting for his return. But Vash knew he would never go back. That life, that existence as a weapon, was over. What happens now? He asked. Now you help us win, Alira said. Help us free the other predators, the other victims. Help us build a galaxy where no child will have their humanity stolen. As if in response to her words, Vash's comm unit crackled to life. Admiral Steele's voice filled the air, tinny and impatient. Predator V-47 report status. The target should have been eliminated hours ago. Vash looked at the communicator, then at Alira. Without hesitation, he crushed the device beneath his heel. The symbolic act felt like the final severing of invisible chains that had bound him for so long. We need to move, Alira said, helping him to his feet. Your ship's disappearance and your missed check-ins will alert them soon enough. Over the following days, as Vash integrated with the rebel forces, he began to understand the true scope of their struggle. The Liberated Worlds Coalition wasn't just a military organization. It was a movement dedicated to healing the wounds the Empire had inflicted across the galaxy. They provided aid to refugees, rescued enslaved populations, and worked to preserve cultures the Empire sought to homogenize. Vash's transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Decades of conditioning couldn't be undone overnight. He suffered nightmares as suppressed memories surfaced. Sometimes in moments of stress, the old programming would reassert itself, and he'd feel the familiar emptiness, the urge to kill without question. But Alira was patient with him, as were the other rebels. They understood that healing took time, that rebuilding a shattered psyche was more challenging than learning to fight. One night, as they sat around a campfire sharing stories, Vash found himself speaking about his recovered memories. Not the sanitized propaganda the Empire had fed him, but the real experiences of a child named Vaughn, who'd loved his family and dreamed of exploring the stars. "I remember my sister's laugh," he said, staring into the flames. "She was 2 years younger than me, had these huge brown eyes and curly hair that our mother was always trying to tame." Alira listened without judgment, her presence an anchor in the storm of his reconstruction. What was her name? Lydia? Her name was Lydia. Tears tracked down his scarred cheeks. They killed her because she wouldn't stop crying during the neural mapping. Just disposed of her like she was nothing. The anger that rose within him then was different from the cold rage the Empire had programmed. This was grief transformed into determination, a burning need to ensure no other child suffered as he and his siblings had. Over the following weeks, Vash threw himself into the rebel cause with the same intensity he had once devoted to Imperial service. But now his skills served life, rather than death. He helped plan rescue operations for other apex predators, using his knowledge of Imperial procedures to outmaneuver their forces. The first successful rescue came 3 months after his defection. Intelligence indicated another predator designation, X-23, had been deployed to a mining world to quell worker unrest. Vash led the mission personally, infiltrating the Imperial base with a precision born of years of experience. He found X-23 in the middle of pacifying a group of striking miners. The Predator moved with mechanical efficiency, cutting down unarmed civilians with emotionless precision. For a moment, Vash saw himself as he'd been a weapon without conscience, a monster wearing human skin. The confrontation was brief but intense. X-23 was skilled enhanced and completely devoted to his mission. But Vash had advantages. His opponent lacked the element of surprise knowledge of predator tactics and something the Empire had tried to crush, a reason to fight beyond mere obedience. When it was over, X-23 lay unconscious neural dampeners, preventing him from fighting, while Vash and the rescue team evacuated the miners. Later, in the safety of a rebel base, they began the delicate process of helping X-23 remember who he'd been before the Empire broke him. The process was repeated again and again. Some predators could be saved. Others were too far gone, too damaged by their conditioning to ever recover their humanity. Those failures haunted Vash, reminding him of how close he'd come to losing himself completely. But for every success, for every weapon transformed back into a person, the Liberated Worlds Coalition grew stronger. Word spread across the galaxy of the apex predator who'd laid down his weapons, who'd chosen compassion over cruelty. Talin was among those they rescued, extracted from a mission on the fortress world of Kuros Major. Unlike some of the others, his conditioning hadn't run as deep, and his recovery was swifter. The reunion between the two former weapons was emotional, one of the few times Vash had seen another predator cry. "I dreamed of you," Talon admitted as they shared a meal in the rebel stronghold. "Even when I couldn't remember who I was, I dreamed someone had shown me there was another way." As the rebellion's strength grew, so did the Empire's response. They deployed new weapons, tightened their grip on captured worlds, and launched increasingly desperate attacks against rebel strongholds. Admiral Steele personally led a fleet of a dozen Star Destroyers in pursuit of Vash and Alira, determined to recapture or kill the defector who dealt such a blow to Imperial power. The confrontation came at the Battle of Meridian Station, a massive space platform that served as a refugee processing center. Imperial forces surrounded the station, demanding the surrender of all rebel personnel. Thousands of civilians' families fleeing Imperial oppression were trapped in the crossfire. Vash stood on the station's command deck beside Alira, watching the Imperial fleet take positions around them. Among the massive vessels, he recognized the Nemesis, the ship that had been his home for so many years. "They'll negotiate," one of the rebel commanders insisted. "They won't risk the civilian casualties." But Vash knew better. He'd served the Empire long enough to understand their thinking. The civilians weren't people to them, they were acceptable losses, examples to be made. They'll attack within the hour, he said quietly. Admiral Steele won't let this opportunity pass. Alira nodded, her face grim. Then we need to get these people out of here. The evacuation began immediately, but it was clear they wouldn't be able to save everyone. The Empire had counted on this, on the rebels' unwillingness to abandon innocents. It was a trap, and they all knew it. As the first Imperial fighters launched their attack runs, Vash made a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier. He suited up in his old armor, not because he wanted to return to what he'd been, but because sometimes the tools of war were necessary to preserve peace. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Rebel fighters engaged Imperial interceptors, while massive capital ships exchanged devastating volleys. Vash led boarding parties against Imperial vessels, using his knowledge of their layouts and tactics to maximum advantage. On the bridge of the Nemesis, he faced Admiral Steele directly for the first time since his defection. The older man showed no surprise at seeing him, though his eyes burned with fury and disappointment. "Predator V-47, the Admiral said, drawing his sidearm. "You've caused considerable trouble." "My name is Von Kader," Vash replied, deflecting the incoming blaster bolt with his molecular blade. "And I'm done being your weapon." Their duel was swift and decisive. Steele was skilled, experienced, and driven by righteous anger. But Vash fought with something the Admiral couldn't understand, the combined strength of regained identity and genuine purpose. When it was over, Vash stood amid the smoldering ruin of the Nemesis's bridge, its crew dead or surrendering. Through the viewports, he could see the tide of battle turning as Imperial ships began to retreat. The refugees were being evacuated successfully. Each life saved a victory against the Empire's callous disregard for suffering. But the real victory was quieter, more personal. In choosing to fight for others, rather than against them in reclaiming his humanity, despite everything the Empire had done to strip it away, Vash had won something far more valuable than any military engagement. Alira found him there amid the wreckage and the dead standing before the viewport, with tears streaming down his face. She didn't speak, simply took his hand and stood beside him as they watched the last of the refugee ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying their precious cargo to safety. "How many more?" Vash asked, finally. "How many more predators? How many more stolen children?" "Too many," Alira admitted. "But we'll find them. One by one, we'll bring them home." The war continued, as they all knew it would. The Empire's grip was strong, their resources vast, their willingness to commit atrocities unlimited. But now they faced something they'd never encountered before, their own weapons turned against them by the power of rediscovered humanity. In the months that followed, the number of liberated predators grew. 12? 20? 50? Each rescue weakened the Empire's military might, while strengthening the rebellion both in numbers and in spirit. The galaxy watched in wonder as the Empire's most fearsome killers learned to be healers, protectors, builders instead of destroyers. Vash found himself at the center of these efforts, not as a leader, but as a symbol. His story spread across the galaxy, transmitted by underground networks and whispered in the slave camps. The apex predator who'd chosen love over hate, compassion over cruelty, freedom over submission. One day, while working on plans for another rescue mission, Alira approached him with news that would change everything. "We found Dr. Meridian," she said, referring to the scientist who'd designed the Apex Predator program. "He's willing to defect." The implications were staggering. Dr. Elias Meridian had been present at the program's inception, had personally overseen the conditioning protocols and neural modifications. His knowledge could unlock the secrets of undoing the deepest conditioning, of healing predators too damaged to save through conventional means. The mission to extract Dr. Meridian was the most dangerous they had ever attempted. He was held on Nexus Prime, the fortress world, where the Predator program had begun, surrounded by multiple layers of security and an entire fleet of warships. As they prepared for the assault, Vash found himself thinking about Lydia again, about all the children who died to create the Empire's perfect Temujumfi killers. This mission wasn't just about saving Dr. Meridian. It was about justice for every life the program had claimed. The attack on Nexus Prime lasted 6 days. Rebel forces fought with desperate courage, knowing they might never get another chance at the Empire's darkest secrets. Vash led the final assault on the laboratory complex, his team moving through corridors that had once been his home. They found Dr. Meridian in his private lab, not attempting to flee, but waiting with an expression of profound sadness on his ancient face. When he saw Vash, recognition and regret warred in his eyes. V-47, he said softly. Or should I say, Vaughn, you remember me? It wasn't a question. I remember all of them. Every child, every procedure, every failure. The doctor's voice was hollow-haunted. I told myself it was for the greater good, for peace and order, but at night I heard their screams. As they evacuated the laboratory, Dr. Meridian shared the most shocking revelation of all. The Empire hadn't just stolen children for the Predator program. They'd been systematically culling entire bloodlines, identifying genetic markers that indicated potential resistance to conditioning. Your parents, he said to Vash as their ship lifted off from Nexus Prime, they weren't random selections. They were targeted because their genetic profiles suggested their children might be difficult to control. The Empire killed entire families to prevent future opposition. The weight of this knowledge was staggering. Not only had the Empire stolen children, but they had committed genocide on a galactic scale, wiping out bloodlines that might have produced natural leaders or rebels. With Dr. Meridian's help, they began developing new methods of healing the most severely damaged predators, neural reconstruction protocols that could restore memories thought lost forever, techniques for rebuilding emotional capacity in those whose humanity had been almost completely stripped away. The work was slow, often painful, but the results were miraculous. Predators who had been written off as irredeemable began to remember fragments of their past to show signs of empathy and connection. Each success proved that the Empire's conditioning, no matter how complete, could never fully erase the human spirit. Years passed. The rebellion grew into a revolution, then into a civil war that engulfed the galaxy. The tide turned slowly. At first, then with increasing momentum as more worlds threw off Imperial rule. The apex predators, once symbols of oppression, became beacons of hope, proof that even the Empire's greatest weapons could choose a different path. Vash and Alira were married in a simple ceremony on a liberated world, witnessed by dozens of former predators and thousands of grateful civilians. It was a day none of them had thought they'd live to see, a day when hope triumphed over despair, when love conquered hate. But the war wasn't over. The Empire, driven into a corner, became more desperate and vicious. They deployed biological weapons, targeted civilian populations, and committed atrocities that shocked even their most loyal supporters. The final battle came at the capital world of Imperius, where the Emperor himself made his last stand. As rebel forces surrounded the palace, Vash led a team of liberated predators in the final assault. They fought not for revenge, but for justice, not to destroy but to free. The Emperor, when they finally reached him, was a broken man surrounded by the corpses of his guards. He looked at Vash with eyes full of madness and defeat. You were my greatest creation, he said, and you became my destruction. No, Vash replied, I became myself. With the Emperor's capture, the war effectively ended. Across the galaxy, Imperial forces surrendered or joined the victorious rebels. Worlds that had been under Imperial rule for centuries celebrated their freedom. In the aftermath, as the galaxy began the long process of healing and rebuilding, Vash found himself appointed to help lead the new government, the Galactic Federation of Free Worlds. His role was to oversee the rehabilitation of former Imperial personnel and the integration of liberated predators into civilian society. It was challenging work. Many couldn't accept the changes, couldn't adapt to a galaxy where power came from consensus rather than force. But progress was made day by day, person by person. standing on the balcony of the Federation building on New Thessia, watching the sun set over a bustling city where humans and aliens worked side by side, Vash reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From weapon to person, from killer to healer, from slave to free man. Alira joined him, their young daughter sleeping in her arms. The child had Alira's green eyes, but Vash's determined jawline, a perfect blend of two people who'd found love in the midst of war. "Any regrets?" Alira asked softly. Vash considered the question seriously. He thought of all the lives he'd taken as an apex predator, all the pain he'd caused in service of the Empire. But he also thought of the predators they'd saved, the worlds they'd liberated, the future they'd built together. "Many regrets," he said finally, "but no desire to change what we've done since." As night fell over their world, Vash looked up at the stars, no longer points of light in enemy territory, but beacons of hope in a galaxy learning to be free. Each star represented a world, a people, a story of survival and resilience. The apex predators had once been symbols of fear, instruments of oppression. Now they were guardians of peace, protectors of the innocent, living proof that no one was beyond redemption. They trained the next generation not in destruction, but in defense, not in blind obedience, but in moral courage. In the years that followed, the story of Vash became legend, passed down through generations as a reminder of the power of choice. Children learned about the predator who'd dropped his weapon, who'd chosen compassion over cruelty, who'd helped break the chains that bound the galaxy. But for Vash himself, the true victory wasn't in the history books or the monuments erected in his honor. It was in the simple moments, watching his daughter take her first steps, sharing laughter with former enemies who'd become friends, falling asleep beside the woman who'd shown him what it meant to be human again. The galaxy was far from perfect. There were still conflicts, still those who sought power over others, still injustices to be fought. But now there was hope, and that made all the difference. As he drifted off to sleep that night, holding his family close, Vash could almost hear the voices of those they'd lost, Lydia and all the other children whose lives had been stolen. But instead of accusation, he heard gratitude for remembering them, for honoring their memory through actions rather than words, for ensuring their deaths hadn't been in vain. The Apex Predator program was dead. The Empire was gone. And in their place, a new galaxy was being born, one where every being had the right to choose their own path, where children could grow up free and unafraid, where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. It wasn't the ending any of them had expected when this journey began, but it was the ending they'd fought for, died for, lived for. And in a galaxy full of stars, that was enough.